right, so we are recording again. And thank you all for coming to today's conversation. And it is going to be a conversation, so it's not going to just be those of us up here on this panel. And our hope is that we can engage in a civil conversation related to decision 2024, the results of the general presidential and congressional elections. My name is Dr. Nicholas Hudson. For those of you who have not met, I serve as the director of the Office of Student Orientation, Leadership, and Engagement. I also serve as the chair of the All in Democracy Task Force with, here at TAMU, which is, its aim is to have universal voter registration of all TAMU students, to educate students around the political process, as well as to turn out students. And one of the things that we are most proud of, I think, from our office perspective, at least my point of view, is that Dust Devils are registered to vote at nearly 85% of Dust Devil students are registered to vote. And we continue to exhibit higher rates of voter turnout than Webb County, as well as our peers in the A&M system. And so we are well informed, and we turn out at a making sure our voices are heard. And so today I have Dr. Jack Byham, who is a associate professor.
What is my title now? I think it's instructional assistant professor.
Assistant professor, we're gonna go with that. Assistant professor of political science here at TAMU. And we're gonna have some questions here, but this is also gonna be a conversation. Thank you all for again coming after we had to reschedule it based off of a university-wide faculty event that we had. So to start things off, and yes, we already have the questions pre-scripted for some of these.
Just not the answers.
Just not the answers, right? What were the biggest surprises of the 2024 election results, and how did they shift the political landscape?
I think that there were a number of big surprises. I wasn't expecting Trump to win all the swing states. I thought that was a surprise. I thought that the election night might go on a little longer than it did. You know, but pretty consistent gains for the Republican Party across the board in this election. That was one thing that surprised me, that they won all the swing states. He did consistently well, or in pretty much lots of demographics. The other thing that surprised me was some of the demographic. The component of this election. You know, for example, Hispanic voters, and in particular Hispanic men, came out for Trump in big numbers, and that was a surprise. He garnered much more of the traditional minority vote than was expected, so I was surprised by that as well.
Yeah, I would kind of echo what you've said. I don't know if there's surprises though, meaning I've been doing this long enough that I can say that the American people never fail to surprise me. So in that way, like I go into an election night not knowing and not having who knows what it's going to be. I would say that some things, as you did, Dr. Byham, that what did stand out the most was in many ways, perhaps a realignment. And we're going to get into this a little bit. My major, by the way, is also political science, and my master's is in legislative affairs. So my background is also in politics, running campaigns. And what I see here is a realignment, not necessarily maybe in the political party realignment way, but in the way campaigns are ran and the way in which voters are reached. And I thought, as a lot of the kind of election night or election kind of analysis has happened, we've begun to see a lot more finger pointing on why can't one political party reach to a specific audience, and why did they focus specifically on traditional media versus some of the new media that was there. I would say another surprise for me was that the top of the ticket, Trump ran many percentage points higher than some of the congressional races. And in fact, I mean, right? So I don't know necessarily if it was the candidate that, or was it the values that were there. So if you look at it, like the Democrats actually gained 2 seats in the House. So I don't know, right? Next question is, do you think that the voter turnout in 2024 was higher or lower than expected? And then what does that tell us about the current political landscape? And maybe putting that in comparison to 2020.
So in comparison to 2020, it was a bit lower, right? It was about 4 million lower. It's been interesting the past several election cycles. You know, the previous 4 cycles to 2020, voter turnout was in the 60 million area, between 60 and 70. In 2020, it jumps to 81. And here we're back down to 77. I was a little surprised it wasn't higher than 81. You know, I thought that this was a much more divisive campaign, and the rhetoric was ratcheted up a notch. There was a lot of drama in this election cycle, you know, with Biden dropping out and Kamala becoming a candidate. And so it's to me, voters were really engaged, right? And the rhetoric of the campaigns was that if the other side wins, it's going to be the end of everything, right? Both of the campaigns took this strategy, this kind of doom and gloom. And so I'm surprised it's not higher than, it wasn't higher than 81.
I would agree. It was, when the numbers came out, I was a little shocked on the lower turnout rates from 2020. And we had, as you said, seen that kind of like uptick in voter turnout. And numbers are starting to come in from a collegiate standpoint. And unlike 2020, it does seem like from a collegiate standpoint, students did not, at the 18 to 24 year age range, not turn out to the same extent as they did in the 2020 election. But I think that was just representative of a larger just decline across the board. And so I don't think enough time has passed yet to see if the youth vote, was that decrease the same as it percentage-wise as it was for the boomers and the millennials and the Gen Xers, and that decrease that's there.
You mean the youth vote as a whole or just for students?
I would say the student and maybe youth vote. I haven't seen kind of an aggregate. I've only been paying attention to collegiate, but yeah, I wonder, as I think from a percentage wise, if I'm not mistaken, they didn't decrease. The youth in general, if I'm not mistaken, 18 to 30 year olds, this election percentage wise compared to 2020, is that?
I think that's right.
Yeah, okay. So what does the 2024 say about the direction of the 2 major political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats?
Well, they have some regrouping to do. I mean, they have challenges that they have to face now. You know, the Republicans have an opportunity to see how much they can accomplish of the agenda to which they sold the American people. So their challenge is going to be to deliver.
Yeah,
you know, that's what's on their task. The Democrats are going to have to regroup a little bit. You know, it's been interesting to read, and I don't have privileged information. I just read the same things, a variety of things everybody else has access to. But, you know, there is a kind of conversation among Democratic Party elites on what went wrong. How do they explain the loss to themselves? And it's actually, they don't all agree on the main factors. You know, it's an interesting kind of conversation. So it's kind of back to the drawing board for the Democratic Party to explain the loss and then regroup and then craft a more successful strategy, hopefully, you know, in the future. I would say one thing about the direction of the parties, you know, and this echoes something that Bernie Sanders has said. So this is not new either. Bernie Sanders has already said this, but in Bernie Sanders' view, the Democratic Party, the core Democratic Party leadership has kind of driven the party away from its traditional core concerns with the working class, allowing the Republicans to step in and capture some of those working class votes and that was a big factor in this election.
correct.
And so if I'm a Democratic Party elite, I'm trying to figure out how to recapture some of those, as many of those working class voters as I can.
We've had that the Democrats, not we, but the Democrats have had since the New Deal, right? A lot of the working class folks they've had for the from that time. And so I think that is correct, that Bernie Sanders did say that that they kind of ceded the point on many ways to the Republican Party. I do wonder now that there's a trifecta in place, as there was in 2016 at the start of the Trump time. Will there be anything accomplished?
That's hard to say. I wish I had a crystal ball.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The Democratic Party will try to oppose Trump's agenda both at the federal level and at the state level. This is what the parties do to each other. So we'll see if they can get it accomplished. They have the opportunity to. This is the time to do it when you don't have a divided government, right? When you have a divided government, I mean, that's a technical term. It just means that either the Senate or the House is dominated by a party other than the party of the president. So that's divided government. Right now, we don't have divided government. You know, the Republicans have the presidency in the Senate and the House. So if anything is to be accomplished, now is the time. So we'll see what they can do. I mean, they're going to try. I know they realize this. I know one of the signs that they realize this is that Trump has gotten started even sooner than he did in 2016 with putting his administration and putting his cabinet together. So he wants to hit the ground running.
Given the small number, the House is like, I think it's going to end up being 220 to 215. They can, when they're taking 3 people, because Matt Gaetz has resigned. He's a Republican, Florida congressperson who was the initial nominee to be the next Attorney General of the United States, and he withdrew from that as well. So they're going to be down potentially 3 seats based off of these appointments that you just talked about, him appointing people or nominating people immediately at the onset. They could be down to 217 to 216 or 215, only 1 vote to spare. How do you accomplish, from a political standpoint, how do you accomplish that much in a House that has many different viewpoints to accomplish an agenda? I think that's going to be a true test. Yeah,
so this is perfectly designed for something that you focus on in political science, you know, the interior of a legislature. In a legislature, you have a leader and then you have a position called a whip, right? And their job is to make sure that those representatives running under the party label are voting the party line. And so even when it's going to require a lot of maneuvering, right? The party leaders are going to have to negotiate with other members of their party in the legislature, and they'll have to trade as legislators do. It'll be a lot of work behind the scenes to motivate individual representatives to stay on board with the party line.
And I wonder, you know, we're talking about political parties, and this is the section that we're talking about the impact on its parties, right? So you have a Republican Party that's led by soon to be President Trump. That's part of like the MAGA movement. Then you have some of the traditionalists in the House that don't necessarily subscribe to all of the MAGA movement kind of ideology. Then you have some isolationists that are in there, some other areas. I wonder if, and then you have the Freedom Caucus, which is in and of themselves are like to throw a wrench into the normal process. As example, after the 2022 election, where it took 15 votes to elect or I believe it was 15 votes to elect the US Speaker. What I guess I'm trying to get at is, given that those small margins and the whip's job to do everything, do we think that things maybe have to be tamped down a little bit to at least be palatable to navigate through the House and then pass the filibuster?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the legislative process it's an interesting process in itself, and if you're not there to watch it firsthand, you have to learn it from a textbook or from something like a legislative channel on TV, and it's hard to learn it that way. But yeah, one of the things that can be changed in order for people to read it is whatever bill itself is being proposed. It might have to be modified so that these Republicans are happy with it and these Republicans over here are happy with it. And this is why it's very difficult for any president to accomplish everything that they set out to do. You know, whenever you interview a president, it's and ask them about what it's like to be president and be the most powerful person in the world. One of the things they frequently say is, I always feel constrained, right? I always feel like I can't do what it is that I want to do because of all these obstacles and all these constraints, which don't immediately meet the eye. So that's how it is to be president. It's like a big cage almost in some respects. And so, yeah, whatever bill is put forward is going to have, in order to pass with these narrow margins, it's going to have to be tailored so that it pleases a variety of Republicans. And that'll mean that, you know, it might not look what it's originally set out to look like.
Interesting. Let's turn our attention to a little bit more locally. Webb County and the rest of South Texas went Republican, went red this 2024 election. In Webb County and some other counties here in South Texas, first time in over a century that they voted for a Republican candidate. How do we, one, explain that? And two, do you believe that there's going to be a shift, that this is going to be a continual shift between parties? Is this somewhat of a realignment of perhaps the Latino community per se?
It's hard to say. So traditionally realignments, you don't really know whether or not they've happened until like 30 years later, because it's not really a realignment unless it sticks. So you can't tell if it sticks until you know down the road. In terms of explaining it, you know, it seemed to me that Hispanics were very clued in to conversations about the economy. Mm-hmm. And they were less interested in some of the more radical elements of the Democratic Party, the identity stuff. It just seemed that Trump had consistent messaging for a long time. Mm-hmm. Even when he was out of office, he was messaging about the importance of the economy and the importance of immigration, but especially the economy. Now, if you survey American voters as a whole, they said the most important thing they're concerned about is inflation and the economy, and then second was immigration. And Trump had very consistent messaging on that. And I think you see a little bit of a class divide as well. I know there's not supposed to be classes in America, but you know, traditionally the factors that go into assessing class are education and income. And the way that the election results played out, it seemed like the higher your income and the higher the number of degrees you have, you kind of trended towards the Democratic candidate. And the fewer number of degrees you have, I'm being very general here, but the fewer number of degrees you have and the less income you have, you kind of trended towards the Republican candidate. And as they're situated in American society, you know, Hispanics are largely upwardly mobile, you know, so I think that part of the explanation there involves those two things.
I think that what you're saying is valid. The relentless focus on economy and immigration, in touching on kind of the pocketbook issues that affect a lot of folks. You know, there has been a trend line though, at least now for, if I'm not mistaken, since 2016, a trend line. So I'm beginning to see a pattern here, at least, if not a realignment, but it's beginning to see a pattern. In 2020, Zapata County was the first county that went red in South Texas. Even if it just by a small margin, I think it was like 5,500 votes, something like that. I can't remember exactly, but it was a small margin. I'm beginning to see a trend line, at least here in South Texas, where you begin to see more Hispanic populations from 2016 till today, 2024, 3 election cycles, presidential election cycles, move more focused on economy, and they're aligning themselves much more with the Republican messaging that's delivered there. So I do agree with that. And speaking on messaging, I want to shift a little bit here. How did social media and digital campaigning influence voter behavior and turnout this time around that you saw, that you've seen in your sphere of?
Yeah, well, this is, you know, traditionally what I teach my students in political science classes is to be older persons who are interested in sitting down and watching the news. And younger persons, they're not too interested in that. They're much more likely to get their news from social media. I mean, there are blessings and there are curses that come with social media. Social media allows political campaigns to do more targeted advertising, for example, right? So you're scrolling along in your Facebook and you get an ad that's tailored just for you. It's quite amazing, right? And a traditional media company can't do that. They're sending a message that if you tune into that channel, no matter where you are in the United States, you're hearing the same message. But not everybody's Facebook account is the same. So tailored messaging, you know, so the opportunity there to reach particular audiences is greater. There's also greater opportunity for misinformation, right? Because can you recognize something produced by a human being versus produced by a bot, for example, right? If you're not a sophisticated user of social media, it's you know, it might not be apparent, right? So the opportunity there for misinformation or disinformation is greater. That's just social media. If you want to broaden it out a little bit, you know, and include things like streaming and talk radio, those tend to be spaces that are more, at least statistically, they tend to veer towards the right a little bit. Those spaces are more right-leaning spaces, just as the mainstream media, if you, again, statistically, you know, they tend to be a little bit skewed left. So there's a kind of balance there. It's hard to say exactly how social media affected this election cycle because it's such a hard thing to measure. We know all these things are going on. We know that there's targeted campaigning. We know there's disinformation, but the extent of it and just what its effects are, those are things that are very, you know, those are hard to measure. People have speculations, but it's very challenging to say exactly how it affected.
Yeah, I mean, that's true. I mean, you know, we're what 4 weeks past the last election. So I don't think we're going to fully know, but you know, when I can speculate a little bit that I think, you know, if you blow through $1 billion in, what is it, 12 weeks, and a lot of it heavily spent on traditional marketing on the television, and I think that there's going to be some analysis that will happen from that maybe spending money on the traditional campaigning methods, block walkers and canvassers and television ads may not yield the same results as appearing on a podcast or whatever method you want to get to, or even just the targeting, the highly targeted nature of social media advertisements.
Yeah, in that limited analysis, yeah, absolutely. And it just makes sense to start spending more money on social media because people are using it to get their news. Even adults are trending that way.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen a recent article that said viewership of all of the major news channels have declined substantially. Yeah. In like my goodness, could this be the end of news? And I don't know. These are things that populate in my mind that in that traditional sense of news, right, that we see here. Just a few more questions. We're going to open up to the rest of the folks here. What are some I guess, how can political parties better engage with voters who feel disillusioned or disengaged from the political process?
That's a tough one. You know, the extreme rhetoric that we saw from the campaigns in this cycle is a double-edged sword. It really fires some people up, but it really turns some people off. I think younger persons, I mean, we have a number of younger persons in the room who can very clearly speak for themselves, but it seems to me that when I try to get the opinions of the students in my class, one of the things that turns them off about politics is how divisive it can be, right? And so just based on that anecdotal evidence, you know, the more extreme your rhetoric, the more doom and gloom. It's kind of a, you know, it's kind of a turnoff. So maybe toning it down a bit would open it up to more engagement. That's just a thought based on anecdotal conversations that that I've had in the classroom.
So let's look at the Democratic Party. So their message was, this is the election. If you do not vote for us, democracy as we know it will fail.
Right.
Right. So what you're saying is tone that portion down of this existential crisis that the country is going through. Like, this is an existential threat to our democracy if you vote this or this candidate.
Yeah, I think that young people are rational people. They're not just emotional people. They're ready for conversations about issues that do affect them. And it's hard to process that kind of information, right? It's hard to process this idea that if we vote for this candidate or that candidate, it's the end of everything. Some people just aren't going to believe that. They're just going to see it. These are politicians. We don't trust what they say anyway. It's just more stuff that they say. Other people may respond to that, but again, just based on my conversations with students, all they hear is adults fighting, and it's kind of like I don't know how to participate in that conversation. There's nothing I can grab onto. It just seems it's like WWE for politicians. So you get on television and who can slam the other person the best, who can get the most gotcha moments, and it just gets kind of tiresome, I think. But it doesn't appeal to the rational side of voters, especially younger voters who are eager to start thinking about politics.
So on that same, yeah, and thank you for that. On that same topic, I guess. So let's say your favored candidate did not win.
Sure.
How do you, which could be the case for folks in this room, right? And there's a lot of hope and kind of like there's a lot of identity tied to candidates at times winning and/or political party, especially for newer voters, and tend to not fully understand that like change is long-term, right? That it maybe take a larger view of it, right? My candidate didn't win this time around. I'm going to sit out election because I'm not going to see the change that I want to see. How do we combat that kind of narrative that exists? Like, I didn't win this time. I'm taking my ball and going to not even participating anymore.
Yeah, I mean, that is, well, you seem to be doing a pretty good job of it yourself with those statistics that you had cited to begin our conversation,
Yeah.
right? So, I don't know whatever you're doing, but it's working. It just seems to me that might be a natural reaction of someone who's very young and just starting out. I don't think it's likely to be the reaction of, as you get older, you realize, you win some, you lose some. And so, the right attitude to take is that it's the longer view. It's the idea that, in a democracy, you don't always get what you want. That's what's great about it. That's what's frustrating about it. And you just have to, wait until the next election. So I think based on the way you frame that question, it strikes me as a kind of an attitude adjustment is what is necessary, basically. This is what is frustrating about democracy, so.
But I absolutely agree with you, but I also wonder if a lot of youth, and I talk to a lot of youth outside of here in Webb County. I've talked to people all throughout really the South Texas. And a lot of youth have said, like, I'm not ever seeing the change that I want to see. It's been the same people on my ballot year after year after year. These people are corrupt, or whatever it may be, whatever your topic of du jour may be. I'm not going to engage. And they become one, either they don't vote. And we see that even in Webb County's election rates. Webb County turned out less than, I think it was 45% of eligible voters this time around went out and voted. Much lower than the statewide totals, much lower than the national numbers as well. Texas tends to not meet the national turnout levels, but even for, let's say, Texas, Webb County was low. So we see a lot, and especially a lot, when the numbers come out, and they will take a while to process them, but historically, the youth, which we're going to say is 18 to 35 here in Webb County, they don't vote at the same levels as those that are older. And we know that in order for you to develop a habit of voting, you need to vote for about 3 to 4 election cycles consistently to develop a lifelong voting habit. So if students or young youth are getting disillusioned with the outcomes at a time where they see the same people on ballots or whatever it may be, how do we ensure that they continue to remain engaged thereafter? It's an attitude adjustment, yes, but they're like, I'm not going to have anything to do with these two political parties.
Mhm.
And I don't know, that may be something to note 2 years when you have another conversation after the 2026 general election, but I don't know.
It's really challenging. I don't have the answer to it. I mean, you can talk about third parties, but you know, those systems have their advantages and disadvantages too. And you know, the youth is split as well. That the youth may have voted in fewer numbers in many areas, but Trump saw an increase in the youth vote, right? So those who did voted more, you know, for Trump. So somehow, you know, he managed to engage those younger voters. It's a hard nut to crack, and I got to be honest with you, I don't have the solution to that.
Yeah, I don't either. I just think that it's interesting, or maybe something that perhaps we do have to focus in on here. For the last portion of our pre-questions here, what is the most important takeaway from the election?
The most important takeaway, I would say that the most important takeaway is probably the soul searching that is being done by the Democratic Party. I think the most important takeaway is that you know, that the economy trumps. I didn't mean to use that word because Trump was, but the economy trumps, you know, the issues that voters place the economy first very clearly. That's what happened in this election, and they took them a little bit more urgently. Not to say nothing else is important, but they took them the most urgently. And so somehow prioritizing the bread and butter issues is the takeaway, I think, rather than other issues that may be more marginal, what are the so-called identity politics, things like this. You know, I think that that's the path for the party. The party has to retake some of those voters that it has lost.
Yeah, it's been a consistently losing lower income, working class voters,
Yeah,
union voters. You know, it's interesting that you say that, though. You know, James Carville, who ran the 1992 presidential campaign of Bill Clinton, coined "keep it simple" in many ways, but it's the economy, stupid, right? You know, and I think that there has been a loss for that. But given the headwinds that that the Democratic Party faced, though, coming into 2024, I think the most important takeaway is that it's going to be a while to dissect any kind of mandate that may or may not have been given this time around. I think Trump did win. He has, as the votes keep being finalized here, did not win over 50% of the vote. It was close, but not win it. But I do think that there's some takeaways here across the board of, yes, the Democratic Party has some soul searching to do and how their messaging is done. But I don't know if it personally, and this is my own opinion, I don't know if any Democrat could have come in and won this election. I think after the abysmal debate that Joe Biden had and frustrating economic news, even though the lowest unemployment, et cetera. I think people were just ready for change this time around. And I don't think that any Democrat could have come in and salvaged this to that extent. That's my takeaway as being more of a party insider with the Democratic Party here in the state of Texas. I don't think anyone could have done it.
You may be right. You know, it was, in one way, the election results are not that surprising, right? Going into the election, the Biden administration had a roughly 41% approval rating, you know, which is a low approval rate.
Yeah.
And so the candidate who's running against the Republican opponent is the number 2 in the administration, part of that 41% low approval rating. So it was just absolutely important for her to come out owning mistakes and distinguishing herself, saying this is what's going to change. And I think she had a difficult time doing that. Maybe given more time, she would have developed, you know. But I think given the limited amount of time that she had difficulty distancing herself and pitching herself as an agent of change.
Yeah, I don't think you can if you're the vice president. And I think there's only been one or maybe 2 other vice presidents that have been elected immediately from being a vice president to become president in the history of the United States. And I think it's only one, if I'm not mistaken, being elected, and that was George H.W. Bush being the number 2 to Reagan, and that was in '88. So nonetheless, those are prescriptive questions. We're going to now open it up to the audience. This is a conversation, we said, so hopefully folks have questions. If not, I'm going to start calling on people. I know many of you in this room.
Me too.
Yeah, exactly.
Can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
How many of you watched the election results on election night? Oh, okay, that's pretty much it. I did too. I planned it. I was like, you know, get myself my drink and I'm just gonna sit back and relax. You know, so. And
you're right. I was surprised on how fast it was. I think the 2020 solved some problems this time around.
Yeah. You know, the longer we wait for those election results, the higher the perception, whether or not it's real, the higher the perception is that there's some kind of impropriety going, some kind of fraud. You know, and the likelihood that translates into some kind of, you know, people taking action, it increases. So it was good. It should be pretty good. You know, with that psychological stress going on for days.
No. Questions, friends? I know you all have them. Whoa. Silence.
It's the same way.
I know. I don't understand this. It's like, gosh, you're all afraid?
With the incoming presidency with Trump, there's a lot of discussion about mass deportation day 1, right? How feasible are promises like that from presidential candidates to actually happen within the first 90 days of their presidency?
You want to start?
Yeah, I will actually. Yeah, so I'm going to speak from my perspective and just understanding the system. Limited at best. 90 days, much more feasible. However, still going to be not as easily done as it can be. One, we have a court system where a lot of these Democratic governors will utilize to the best of their ability to slow walk whatever legislative or executive decision that's going to be done. So deportation may be slow walked. The rounding up of individuals will take, I mean, where are you going to put 12 million people, right? I know Texas has offered up quite a bit of our land for these deportation centers, but I don't know if you can feasibly round them up. I also don't know and this is just my own kind of understanding of the world, I don't fully know if our business and or agriculture or communities are best equipped to be having everybody rounded up right now. And so I think that while it is a rhetoric that is being done. I do think that there's going to be action taken. But I do not believe we look down here to traditionally the 100 days is in, I don't know, it's like June-ish. I don't think when we hit the 100 days mark, or maybe it's like a little bit before then, I don't think we're going to be seeing much action done. Because I do believe it will be blocked in courts.
Yeah, that's, I don't have anything to change about that answer. You know, if you just look at the numbers, it's difficult. If you think of the federal workforce who's going to be assigned to this task, and the number of those who are potentially eligible for deportation proceedings, you know, it's a big fraction, right? I mean, it's a small, you know, the federal workforce is small compared to, so they have a lot of work to do, right? So it's very interesting to me how that policy is going to play out at the beginning, how it's going to be shaped, right? Who's going to be first, right? If you follow Trump's rhetoric, it's likely, this is just a guess on my part, but he's probably going to start with those with criminal violations, right? So, you know, your agricultural worker who may be here illegally working on a farm, probably not going to get first priority, right? And they're going to have to prioritize. So it'll be very interesting to me to see how that policy plays itself out. But just in terms of doing it instantly, no, it's gonna take a long time.
I also think that and you hit it earlier, we also just did it again here. Like there's constraints in place for any president, no matter what policy that they have, right? Trump has said he wants to use US military to do that. It's going to be almost a complete change of pre-existing defense policy that is written into law to be able to change that. And the way the United States military code and policy is written, it's the National Defense Authorization Act. It has to be passed by both chambers of the House. And it is, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm not 100% positive on this, it is a bill that can be filibustered. So it could be a little bit more challenging to do so than I think.
The courts will probably be the first order of defense, as they often are. You know, the president gives an executive order, which is subject to judicial review. If the court wants it to be, and a federal judge somewhere will declare it, you know, unconstitutional, and then we'll have to wait for the court system to play itself out. And we see that a lot with executive policies. So we can almost count on it for 100% certain happening.
Yeah.
In many cases. Yeah.
Hence why I'm still paying student loans. Right? Because that was a promise from the Biden administration that he was going to get rid of student loans. And guess what? That was thrown out by the United States Supreme Court, right? Like, so just, yeah, that's why we are still here. What else, friends? Yeah.
Do you think Trump presidency will things like
Well, just based on what I heard Trump say, I don't think our national parks are in danger of totally disappearing. You know, he's interested in drilling. He likes to say drill, big drill, so drill. You know, famously, he's not into you know, climate science. Right? I mean, all of this is so self-evident, right? So Yeah, that too, he's gonna try to get the pipeline, done, all of it. I think he'll try to do exactly what he said, but I think we'll still have our national parks.
Yes, of course, I meant more like about pollution and people being worried about gas prices being raised because of these policies being encouraged. Specifically, like California is viewed as a model state. I know a lot of people are worried about having spills everywhere and pollution from that, like it's happening in New Mexico. In the oil pollution there, a lot of environmental policies are happening because there isn't, so to speak, a good number of regulations.
Mhm. Some of that probably will become a reality. To what extent, it's hard to say. The political goal for the country that he's envisioning involves lower gas prices, right? It involves energy independence, it involves less dependence on foreign emissions. So yeah, I mean, that's going to come at a cost. The environment probably will suffer. But again, the extent to which I'm not in a position, so I'm just not that kind of scientist.
I do think though, I'm not that type of scientist either, but I do think that there's like a focus. If you look at what the administration has said that they want to accomplish is less regulations. And so anytime you have a rollback of existing regulations, there's going to be an equal kind of reaction to that. I mean, one of his biggest supporters, if I'm not mistaken, is Elon Musk, who is the owner, creator of Tesla.
An X,
yes, I do. I'm no longer on X, but so he, it's electric vehicles, right? So it's kind of give or take a little bit, right? On how his administration's policies related to the environment will go. I do know, based off of what was said, that they want to get rid of the tax credit for purchasing electric vehicles, which is, I have an electric vehicle and I'm like, thank goodness I got it already, but yeah, I don't know. So I think he's being surrounded by folks that do believe in some of the environmental progress that's been achieved that does benefit it. And there may now be a focus maybe less on electric vehicles, for example, so less on oil and gas, maybe more on hydrogen power, which is like, renewable there as well. I don't know. See. Any other questions? Yes, Britta.
Yeah, so kind of leading into, I guess, what y'all said was one of the major issues with the economy, right? So
Yeah.
I've heard a lot of discussion, especially about like the tariffs that Trump has in plan, ironically after the election rather than before, very interesting. But how do you think those would affect the country if they were put into place? Do you think that would, better our economic situation? I've heard a lot of argument that it's just going to make things worse and like raise prices. Have y'all been keeping up with that? What do y'all think about?
Well, here it's good to talk about the short term and the long term effects. In the short term, it may raise prices, right? The long term effects may be more salutary. They may be better, unless those policies are then canceled by the next administration. Trump says tariff is a beautiful word. He said it, he helped the most beautiful word in the English language. And we did. He has a great word. Yes, which I love that term. But yeah, the tariff. So Trump, the way I understand Trump on his rhetoric on this is a way of negotiating with other countries. Okay, so it's part of his foreign policy. Trump is a businessman, he's a negotiator, he prides himself on that kind of thing. So he's going to play his strongest position, he's going to present his strongest position up front, and it's going to seem scary to you. He's going to, and not you personally, I just mean it's going to seem drastic, right? But then in negotiations, it's going to be scaled back and cut back. But that's, as a businessman negotiator, he wants to start from his strongest foot. So the tariffs are a way of getting other countries, to put it bluntly, to do what's in America's best interest. And what's being manipulated there is access to American markets. So one of the interesting things, we didn't touch on foreign policy, but this actually kind of touches on foreign policy. if you look at the reaction to leaders of other countries to Trump, the European Union leaders were kind of, oh, well, here we go again. They're kind of worried. But a lot of leaders of so-called emerging countries are congratulating Trump, and they're excited to work with him. Why? Well, because this business about tariffs means he's open to negotiation. He's going to threaten tariffs. All these threats are designed to get you to the negotiating table. And so what Trump is not going to do, what other presidents sometimes do, is say, well, you know, there's not enough social justice in your country. There's not enough democracy. You have human rights violations and all of that. We're just not going to be, you know, the one that steals off, right? Trump is not that guy, because he's interested in what's doing best for the American economy. So he's going to be focused on that. So he's going to have this club, the club of access to the American markets. And he's going to use that as a negotiating tool. And tariffs are going to be part of that. So whatever number Trump throws out at first, believe me, it probably is not going to be the last number. So he's full of bluster. And that's we've learned that that's part of his strategy. That's how I see the tariff thing. I see it as especially regarding international relations and doing what's best in international.
I would absolutely agree with that, but it's not something new though. So he's been advocating for tariffs since 2015 when he went down the escalator. He's a huge fan of tariffs.
Sure.
And even just this last week, he had both Claudia Sheinbaum, who's the president of Mexico, and Justin Trudeau, who is the president or prime minister of Canada, after he first announced 25% tariff rates. Both, I mean, Justin flew down to Mar-a-Lago,
Yeah.
And Claudia also, right? You know what I mean? Like, yeah, it's like, you know what I mean? So they're both agreeing they're going to do something about fentanyl. They're going to both do something about immigration. And guess what? He's already scaled back some of that rhetoric related to the 25% tariffs, right? So I do think, even as it relates to the BRICS nations, and the BRICS nations are Brazil, Russia, India, China, and I always forget to ask. South Africa. He's already advocating the same thing of having higher tariffs against the BRICS nations versus other nations. So I think there's going to be a lot of foreign policy maneuvered in those tariffs long term. We have reached 4:20, which is the end of the common hour here. Really appreciate you all coming and having a conversation with us today.
Yes, thank you.
Yes. So if you have not signed in yet, please sign in. And thank you all. Good luck on finals as we progress through here.
So